Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome to the Journal of Space Commerce podcast. I'm Tom Patton. Success in space begins with careful planning and mission support. Success in funding, whether for private funding or a government contract, begins with the pitch, telling your story. Orbital Velocity is a consulting firm which focuses on mission support, proposal development, and strategic consulting for space-related organizations, particularly startups, universities, and government contractors. My guest on this edition of the Journal of Space Commerce podcast is Jeff Nosanov, the founder of Orbital Velocity. Jeff, thank you for your time today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Let's start out really kind of the bare bones basics and talk about what inspired you to start Orbital Velocity and how that reflects your journey through NASA, Amazon Web Services, and other startups.
Sure. So basically, it's the culmination of all of the different career experience I have. And that really started at JPL, NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, where after some regulatory compliance work, I decided I didn't want to do that forever. That was not as much fun, even as the little amount of fun that it sounds like. And I got involved in writing mission proposals. And I found that was an incredibly exciting field of work, combining space exploration and science and engineering and people and financing. And so I became very good at that. It turns out I had a knack for it. And then I left JPL and I had started a startup company, raised venture capital, which it wasn't a space one, but it got me up that learning curve of finding initial startup capital from the venture capital world for advanced technology. And then I was a consultant at Hopkins APL, where I was the proposal manager for a heliophysics mission that's launching this year, a large NASA science mission. And then the government shut down in 2019, and I got a job at Amazon Web Services, where I very fortunately was exposed to the now rapidly changing space computing infrastructure and set of technologies. And I got a lot more experience with the DoD there. And so for the past few years, I've been mentoring startups trying to get into the space world and bringing all of that experience to bear on government and private funding to help space companies get off the ground, find a contract that sustains them. In some cases, introduce novel technologies that are harder to get past that initial procurement step. And basically bringing my broad knowledge of the federal government funding to the funding world to help companies and organizations, particularly in 2025 as everything is changing and
Right.
We have to kind of stay on a daily basis up to date with the priorities and funding mechanisms of this administration.
Now, you've helped secure over $2 billion in contracts. So you do have a track record in this regard. What do you feel like is the secret to winning a space proposal?
Sure. So the secret for a space proposal is to know what they want before they do, they being the sponsor or the agency, and ideally influence what they want before they do. And so we call that shaping the opportunity in the space business. And that could be everything from extensive networking well in advance of when you actually expect a opportunity to be published, or in the scientific side, effective advocacy of your technology or instrumentation, or even your scientific goals, because these things are all competed and mutually exclusive in some cases, so that by the time that the contracts people at agencies like NASA and DoD, by the time the contracts people are writing something, that it's basically for what you want to sell them or what you've already been working on, so that when one of these documents comes out, it's not a surprise. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. It's what you've been helping them decide they need all along.
When you talk about space proposals, though, and particularly when it comes to funding and folks who are going to be giving money to, let's say, a startup company, it's a long, long lead time generally. And financiers have a tendency to want to see a return on their investment, and the quicker
Mhm.
the better. Do you work on the other side of that as well? Do you work with the financial people to help them understand exactly how long they're going to have to wait to see a return on investment?
Yes, that's actually kind of the inverse problem, as you said. A lot of investors, there's a lot of money moving into the space exploration startup
Right.
companies. Ultimately, everyone expects the governments to be the major customers, and that's probably fair. But where you get into really interesting details is how do you decide as an investor, where do you put your funding both to minimize your risk and maximize your return, but also at a realistically and semi-accurately plan for when these things are going to actually get purchased. And it's not quite the same as a traditional venture capital funding system where you're going out to a broader commercial market or the home or the consumer where you can hope for and count on massive adoption really quickly, for example, like what we've seen with generative AI,
Hmm.
when the government is the customer, or at least the anchor customer, so to speak, or even more common, the customer that reduces the risk for you, you're kind of stuck with government timelines. And so another thing I do is help organizations looking to deploy capital make realistic planning exercises for that sort of scenario.
How long will that paradigm last, though, that government is the major customer, with companies like SpaceX now doing probably 90% of the
Mhm.
launches that are happening? So many other companies build. I mean, NASA built all the satellites until just the
Sure.
last few years. How long does that paradigm last, where that perception of government
Mhm.
being the primary customer shift over to being commercial companies?
So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. One of them is that as long as the government is investing in this, the companies and innovators will view them as the risk reducers. So if they're buying, people will try to sell to them to demonstrate their technologies and reduce risks before the commercial market is the target. Now, if as one interpretation of the NASA budget is is that's a less of a priority, then you are going to start to see a more established company perhaps adopting something early or and then reducing its risk that way. So, like you said, SpaceX. And although it should be pointed out that that NASA was the anchor and is the
Sure.
anchor tenant for SpaceX, which reduces its risk, allowing it to market commercially so successfully. So it really depends on what the government decides it wants to do. If it wants to get out of that space, then you'll start to see um, by process of elimination that role move to companies, which will probably move a little faster. But I don't think anyone involved actually wants NASA to fully exit that role because, again, it's the right role for the longer term focus, less return on investment focused government agency in such a complex technical space.
What then about universities and startups? How do they
Mm.
complete their teams and succeed in space missions?
Sure. So for many decades, universities would have large staffs of scientists, different fields and engineers, and often work with NASA centers or JPL or industry to deliver on contracts. But current events in 2025, to put it generally, have resulted in a lot of university attrition that I think is going to leave universities short on staff once the focus returns to actually delivering on contracts. And so, one of my goals with orbital velocity is to have expertise ready to deploy on a contract basis to these organizations to fill in those teams when the time comes. And unfortunately, lots of people have been let go from NASA or are leaving, and so I don't think there'll be a shortage of such people once the opportunity space sort of returns to actually getting projects done. Now, there's great examples in planetary science of the planetary alignments forcing certain actions where we can't just wait for the planets aren't going to wait for us, basically. If the
Right.
planets are going to be lined up in a certain way, and if that matters, well, we have to be there. So that there's not a lot of that coming up, but it's a good perspective on space, which is that the universe doesn't wait for us to get our blank together. We have to be ready, and eventually, and hopefully soon, that will return to the priority.
So orbital mechanics is playing a role.
Always. I mean, one of my favorite stories is that the Voyager mission, which inspired me and so many others, is still going on, of course. The planetary alignment that allowed it in the 70s, which was discovered in the 60s, the last
Mhm.
time that planetary alignment happened was when Thomas Jefferson was the president.
Oh,
It's about a 170-year cycle or something like that. And him being a scientist, I like to think Thomas Jefferson would have appreciated it had he known of such things, but nobody really did. But anyway, so that's just a good example that, we've had two of those alignments in the entire all of American history. It's a good thing we were ready for the second one.
yes, indeed. Jeff, talk about one of the most exciting or unconventional mission concepts you might have worked on.
Sure. So one of my great honors is to have been and to be a NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts Fellow,
Mhm.
and that program, the NIAC for short, it's really what you imagine NASA to be when you're 5 years old, or when you're watching Star Trek. You imagine it to be people solving incredibly complex, creative problems with fanciful technology and science fiction level tools. Now, in reality, it's only about 1% of NASA, maybe less, because most of NASA has to reduce risk on really that's the major drive. And one of my podcast guests last week, actually, Jason Derleth, I haven't posted it yet, but he made a very interesting observation. He was a NASA headquarters executive and involved in some planning at Goddard for the next major telescope after James Webb. And
Mhm.
he made the observation that if your project management rules say that you only get called into review if your budget goes up to 115%, if you're only over by, if you're only punished for exceeding your budget by 15%, well, then in the space environment where the risk is infinite, you're required to spend 114.9% of your budget
Sure.
because your task is to reduce risk. And so I just love that observation. But getting back to your actual question, for the high risk, high reward stuff that the NIAC program funds, that's really been the most rewarding thing for me is combining technologies and approaches to solve scientific and national defense problems, or at least create solutions for those problems, using really creative and unorthodox solutions. For example, one of the big science and possibly even defense national security questions is the caves on the moon.
Mhm.
What are the regions of the moon suitable for insert your technology or exert your capability? And one really compelling space is the caves on the moon, and there's hundreds of them. And so about 10 years ago, most of the discussion had been in rovers and landers to explore these caves, which require one rover or lander per cave, and that gets very expensive and very risky and very time consuming. So my team and we came up with this idea where you use a laser technology called beyond line of sight imaging, basically looking around corners with a laser, the
Hmm.
laser light bouncing around the corners and coming back. And so we designed a mission that could map out 100 caves in one orbiter without even landing. And actually, this thing behind me here is my poster from NASA Tech Day on the Hill in 2019, where I presented this on Capitol Hill to among others the then NASA administrator and Jim Bridenstine, and he said that's pretty cool. It should be a program of record. And I said, well, I accept cash, checks, and gold bullion. And I
Not
think
Bitcoin?
I should have said that's a good point. I should have said Bitcoin. And he chuckled, and I tried to follow up on it, but it clearly was not intended. But for anyone interested in my services, I will not hesitate to make that joke in front of the NASA administrator. So that shows you how serious I am about making your mission happen, which is again sort of my tagline.
Well,
But so that's why I keep that up here, just to remind me of those experiences and that approach to getting things done.
Having never met Administrator Bridenstine,
Uh,
I don't know his sense of humor, but from what I've heard about him, I can understand why he probably appreciated that.
well, I try, and if I try to at least be memorable.
Talk about your time at Amazon Web Services. How did that shape your
Yes.
view of cloud computing's role in space?
Oh, I'm so glad that things worked out that way because when the government shut down in 2019, I had a couple of consulting contracts, and I had my startup. And within 1 week, it was a very long week, I lost all of those contracts, including an Army contract, where they basically said, "Hey, the administration is taking the innovation money. Sorry." And I said, "Oh, okay, well." Thanks, I guess. And so that after that week, I woke up the next Monday with basically no work, and I said, "Well, this is not going to work." So I said, go back and get a real job, and I very fortunately had a connection at Amazon Web Services that got me the interview, and my first job there was defense proposal manager.
Hmm.
And so as I went through the training, and I've always been a computer guy, was programming Java in the 90s back when I could. It's gotten a bit more complicated since then. So I was excited to enter Amazon Web Services and really kind of get up to speed on the 20 years of IT and computing technology that I was sort of adjacent to in the space world instead of active in. And of course, I found an incredibly creative and vibrant technology world that the entire modern internet and world relies on, of course. And after a year in the defense side, where I won it was a high nine-figure contract for a Navy cloud migration, I switched into the aerospace and satellite role, and that's where I really started to see, as a proposal manager, I really started to see the edge computing capability developing, and really the ability of the modern world to basically have satellites directly connected to the internet through a series of ground stations, not having to go through the major contractors that, added a lot of cost, and really start to see the innovation possible there. So it was great coincidence, and I'd like to think I was smart enough to see that coming, but I don't know if I can say that quite accurately. But it was a really great introduction to the modern IT and computing infrastructure that increasingly the space industry relies on, and that certainly the where the cost structure is a lot more suitable for emerging space companies and capabilities.
I'm talking with Jeff Nosanov, founder of Orbital Velocity, on the Journal of Space Commerce podcast, and we'll continue this conversation in just a moment. But right now, why not take a moment to click subscribe to be sure you don't miss any of our podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, any of the videos from Ex Terra Media. And please consider becoming a paid subscriber. Whether you're a space professional, investor, or enthusiast, paid subscribers have first access to premium articles and podcasts focused on the new space economy. Just visit www.xterrajsc.com and help keep the Journal of Space Commerce independent as we chronicle, cajole, and when necessary, critique the commercial space industry. Jeff, you're talking about programming Java brought to mind to me a kind of a horrid flashback of walking into a computer lab with a stack of punch cards that I was programming in COBOL.
Well, I hear that the various public utilities of the state of New Jersey are hiring retired COBOL programmers because they're trying to migrate all that stuff. So you might have a second or third career waiting for you.
I don't know that I remember it that well. Let's
Yeah,
get back to the business at hand, shall we?
sure.
You've worked on everything from lunar caves, you talked about that a little bit, to interstellar probes. How do you approach these diverse challenges?
Well, it might sound a little cliche, but it honestly comes from a place of genuine curiosity. I've always been interested in how things work, whether it was, speaking of old computers, whether it was an IBM, I can't remember the model number, IBM PC in the mid 80s, which is my first
Mm.
computer, um, up to how the Voyager spacecraft worked. And when I was at JPL, one of my favorite things to do when my work was done was just go walk around and ask everybody everything I could think of until they told me to leave, basically. And and I thought, I'm not going to be here forever, although I wanted to. And so I ought to get I ought to learn everything I can from these people, and I'm so glad I did. And so when I have a new engagement, my thought process is really, well, what can I learn from this? What obviously I have to learn everything about the goals and the technology and all of that. But I really try to go deeper and understand, the why and the where and the when and all of that. And in my experience, that's given me a place to start the actual work, the business development work in many cases from a perspective that really understands the value of what's being offered and what's being presented to the sponsor or the government or whoever. So that's really where it comes from. I love to know how things work.
How do you strike a balance then between technical feasibility with
Mhm.
visionary thinking in that consulting work?
That's a great question. And in fact, I was a reviewer for NIAC last fall, and one of the questions I see people ask is just and again, this is a very small program, not meant to be an example of all of NASA. But someone asked a great question, which is, well, what happens if something we want to propose is technically possible, but it would require all of the titanium in the entire solar system? And
Okay.
so the question was, is that in scope or not? And the answer is really no, because even if your innovation is possible, it's impractical to execute it. And I've found that impractical to execute it without 100 other miracles, basically. And that extreme I've found is an interesting way of thinking about the question that you just asked, which is, it really comes down to what does the program want or what does the customer want? In the case of NAC, they want ambitious out there ideas. In the case of, let's say, planetary science, they don't. They want
Right.
a low risk, high science return mission. In the case of the Air Force, they don't. They also want low risk, and they want mission success and so on. So it really starts with what does the customer actually want? And if there's room to present something innovative and visionary, that's great because that demonstrates a value to the customer that really isn't as common. But it has to start with what the customer wants, which
What
is
role
why I'm
then?
so relieved that NIAC is still there because there's
Yeah.
still a place to explore things like that will eventually become the low risk things that separate the United States and our industry from rivals and peers around the world.
And high risk often becomes at least medium risk
Oh
with
yeah,
iteration.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And if we're not innovating, someone else is. So the
Sure.
balance, as you mentioned, is critical.
What role then, Jeff, do you see orbital velocity playing in the future
Mhm.
of the commercial space industry?
Well, it's my hope that I can grow this organization into something with a couple of different arms, one of which is the actual proposal work, so helping organizations present capabilities to customers, but also the staffing role, the staffing role where I can provide subject matter experts much faster um, to organizations that need them as kind of the old model of standing teams kind of slowly fades away.
Mhm.
And also the capitalization role where I can help people find funding, whether it's from the government or venture capital or private equity, an increasingly large player in the space world. And so basically to spend all my time talking about space is really the goal and bringing to bear the different experience that I have in creating value and accomplishing the mission.
What trends then, Jeff, do you see in the space industry that excite you, and what trends do you see that concern you?
Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that the big trend now is Golden Dome and national defense space. And I think that almost anyone with the space technology to offer or capabilities to offer is probably looking at the Golden Dome and other national defense systems right now. Especially while we wait for NASA to get organized under this new administration. And that's not to say there aren't ongoing projects with NASA, but there's fewer of them now.
Hmm.
So that balance, I think, is an important one to strike for any space organization. NASA is a little higher risk tolerance than the Pentagon generally, but um, again, all of this is in flux in 2025, and a lot of the time I've spent this year working is trying to make sense of that for people trying to offer things to these agencies. Things I'm concerned with, honestly, there's a lot of scams in the space industry right now, and um, on the one hand, you could say the space industry the commercial space industry has grown up a little bit and that it's big enough to even attract the scams.
Right.
But I find that kind of not much comfort because to me, space exploration is so personally meaningful and exciting. I hate to see people taking advantage of that in others. And so that's a worrying trend. I suppose it's not unique to space, but it's still upsetting because it does take a lifetime to become an expert in this field in one thing or another, whether it's a PhD or otherwise, and getting involved with scams can unfortunately really affect someone's career, even if it's entirely well-meaning. And these these one of the things I talk about with my guest for the podcast I posted today was how in the space industry you often see people who fell in love with the subject as children and really never left it, never lost it.
Hmm.
It's certainly true of me. And so they're perhaps the passion is perhaps easier to exploit. And that's a generalization, maybe not fair, but it really pains me to see these things happening because I know that perhaps more likely than not, this is a person who's been passionate about this subject for their entire life, and that's really sad. So it remains to be seen whether the regulators of the world will be able to make a meaningful dent in these sorts of things.
What's your take, Jeff, on the future of public-private partnerships in space exploration?
Well, I think it depends how you define that. I think pretty much every major mission has been a public-private partnership in one way or another
Right.
because no, NASA doesn't build um, every component. I mean, there's always a procurement of something, some more than others. And I think that in the modern media world where perception is increasingly more important than reality. Everyone involved has a tendency to downplay the public part if it benefits them or downplay the private part if it benefits them. But ultimately, the complexity of these things means that almost all of these large systems are a public-private partnership. You could argue, let's say, a fully private space company is not, but they're still using a shared resource of, in many cases, a public funded launch site,
Hmm.
or even the spectrum sharing itself is a common good and is managed by public organizations. So I think being too rigid on that is not helpful. Um, and certainly the largest missions, the ones that really push humanity forward, are going to be public-private
Sure.
and global, probably, um, simply because of the scale.
And we're seeing that with Artemis, obviously, which has so
Sure.
many private companies that are contributing, but also so many different government space agencies that are
Yeah.
contributing with the Gateway and the whole and all of those various bits and pieces that are going to hopefully get somebody back on the moon one day. I've got my fingers crossed, but I'm cautiously
Sure.
optimistic.
And that's a great example. And it also demonstrates the global nature of all of this in that it really challenges our human institutions, our global organizations, and the biases that a lot of people have and organizations have uh, in regarding the rest of the world. So to do solar system wide things, we're going to need Earth-wide effort. And that remains a major challenge for people, for humans in 2025. But that's always been the case. So I'm not too I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful actually. This is just a bigger version of the global human conflicts we've always had.
I'm going to ask you to blue sky for just a minute as we get
Mhm.
ready to wrap up and talk about designing your dream mission with unlimited resources. What would that be?
Well, unlimited resources, that could go a long way, but to me there's one major, so to me that question comes to leadership.
Right.
If a nation, in practical terms, were to say we are going to lead humanity into the 22nd century, we are going to do something big. I think that the obvious target is to go look for life on Mars. I could dream bigger than that. I certainly have, but from a practical um, expression of human and domestic leadership, I think it has to be getting to that question, and that would be probably humans on Mars, advanced chemical analysis equipment on Mars, probably a 300 to $500 billion mission would yield, as all space projects do, would yield more than that eventually in spin-off technologies, industry creation, and so on. But uh, that's about as far as I would dream with that task. I could go, like I said, I could go farther, but that would, I think, be a really effective mission for the rest of my life, at least, in projecting American leadership values and capability. And I think the world would respond positively to that. So that's what I would like to see. And hopefully that doesn't sound too naive, but I certainly would love to see something like that in my lifetime.
Wouldn't we all? Shameless self-promotion time, Jeff. Talk about how people can find you and Orbital Velocity and give us what's
Sure.
going on with your podcast.
Sure. So you can find me at orbitalvelocity.space. That is the website for my consulting company. And there's some basic information there about a lot of what we've talked about, services that we provide and contact information. And my podcast is called the Space Madness Podcast. And I usually start the episodes with a cheesy introduction about why I called it that. And it basically just represents the kind of the relationship I have with space exploration that I think a lot of us do. It's sort of a maddening one in that you love it so much, it's so interesting. You sometimes wish you could do something else, but your heart kind of keeps pulling you back to it because it's just such an engaging and interesting subject. So I have some exciting stuff coming up, both from industry luminaries like Lou Friedman, talking about his life and career, the founder of the Planetary Society, one of the co-founders, and from him all the way to a new PhD from Georgia Tech, talking about life detection on Mars technologies. So, Space Madness podcast, anywhere you get podcasts or YouTube, and I aim to inform, entertain, and just share the human side of all of this, which is often lost in the big picture media description of it.
Great. Well, we'll go check it out, and
Thank
we'll
you.
certainly include a link to that on
Great.
the Journal of Space Commerce as well. Jeff, we're out of time. I really do appreciate your time today,
Well, likewise. Thanks very much for having me.
and we'll be hearing more from you in the future. Jeff
Absolutely.
Jeff Nosanov is the founder of Orbital Velocity. That's going to do it for this edition of the Journal of Space Commerce podcast, a production of Ex Terra Media. The executive producers are Mike Turner and Tom Patton, with production assistance from Debbie Turner. Check out our YouTube channel and be sure to click on subscribe so you can stay up to date on developments in space commerce and be notified when we post new videos. You can get daily updates on space commerce by subscribing to the Journal of Space Commerce on Substack at www.xterrajsc.com. You can connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on X at xterrajsc. And please consider becoming a paid subscriber. Whether you're a space professional, investor, or enthusiast, paid subscribers have first access to premium articles and podcasts focused on the new space economy. Just visit xterrajsc.com and help keep the Journal of Space Commerce independent as we chronicle, cajole, and, when necessary, critique the commercial space industry. Until next time, I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for joining us.